I never thought much about electrical work until the day my kitchen outlet started smoking. I was making coffee on a Tuesday morning when I saw the little wisps coming from behind the counter, and I did what any reasonable person does when they think their apartment might burn down. I panicked and called the first electrician I could find on Google. That's how I met Soren. He showed up about an hour later, this tall guy with copper-colored hair, pulled back in a small bun, wearing a navy work shirt with his name embroidered on the pocket. He had these incredibly focused green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, and when he shook my hand, I noticed his fingers were calloused, but his grip was gentle. I'm Marcus, by the way. I work from home doing graphic design, which means I spend most of my days in sweatpants talking to my cat, so having another human in my space felt oddly intimate. Soren fixed the outlet in about 20 minutes. Turned out to be faulty wiring from the previous tenant's DIY disaster. He was efficient, professional, explained everything he was doing in this low, calm voice that somehow made electrical code sound interesting. When he finished, he packed up his tools, gave me a quote that was more than fair, and left. I went back to my coffee and my deadline, thinking that was that. Except 2 days later, my doorbell rang around 7 in the evening. I opened it to find Soren standing there looking slightly embarrassed, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "I think I left my voltage tester here," he said. "The small yellow one. I've torn apart my van and it's the only place it could be." I let him in, and we looked around where he'd been working. Sure enough, there it was, wedged between my refrigerator and the counter. He thanked me, apologized for the inconvenience, and left. I remember watching him walk down the hallway and thinking he had really nice shoulders. 3 days after that, the doorbell again. This time it was almost 8 at night and I'd just finished dinner. I opened the door and there was Soren, doing that same embarrassed thing where he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "I know this is ridiculous," he said, "but I think I left my wire strippers this time. The good ones with the red handles." I started laughing because what else do you do when the same electrician keeps leaving tools in your apartment? "Come in," I said. "Let's find them." We searched together this time and I found them under the sink. As I handed them to him, our fingers brushed and I felt this little jolt of electricity. I know, terrible pun, but that's genuinely what it felt like. He held on to the wire strippers but didn't move away immediately. "Thanks," he said. "I don't usually do this. Lose things, I mean. I'm actually pretty organized." I smiled and said maybe my apartment had a Bermuda Triangle for electrical tools. He laughed at that, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and I felt something shift in my chest. The next week, Tuesday again, doorbell. I was starting to recognize the pattern. I opened the door already smiling, and Soren was there holding up his hands in surrender. "Okay," he said, "I know how this looks, but I swear I left my headlamp here, the one I wear when I'm working in tight spaces. I need it for a job tomorrow." I stepped aside and gestured him in like we'd done this 100 times. "You know," I said, "if you want to just leave a whole toolbox here, you're welcome too. Might save you the trips." He grinned and said that would probably be too convenient. We found the headlamp on top of my bookshelf, which made no sense at all because he'd only worked in the kitchen. As he reached for it, he paused and looked at the books. "You read a lot," he observed. "I do," I said. "Mostly fiction. Escape from reality, you know." He nodded slowly, running his finger along the spines. "I get that," he said. "I listen to audiobooks while I work. Right now I'm in the middle of this mystery series that's probably rotting my brain, but I can't stop." We stood there talking about books for 20 minutes. He never made a move to leave. I never suggested he should. When he finally did go, he turned at the door and said, "You know, I have a theory." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About why I keep leaving things here," he said quietly. "I think maybe I want a reason to come back." My heart did this stupid flip in my chest. And why would you want that? I asked, even though I was pretty sure I knew. He looked at me with those green eyes, really looked at me and said, I think you know, Marcus. Then he left, and I stood in my doorway for a full 5 minutes trying to remember how to breathe normally. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying the conversation, the way he'd said my name, the possibility hanging in the air between us. I'd dated men before, been out since college, but there was something different about this. Something about Soren that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I found myself hoping he'd forget something else, which was absurd because he was clearly leaving things on purpose at this point. 4 days of silence. I jumped every time my phone buzzed. I found excuses to walk past my front door. I felt like a teenager again, all nervous energy and what-ifs. Then, Friday evening, the doorbell. I practically ran to open it. Soren stood there without his work shirt this time, just a dark green Henley that made his eyes even more striking. He wasn't holding any tools. I didn't leave anything, he said. I checked 3 times. I know, I said. So why are you here? I asked, even though my pulse was racing. He took a breath. Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because I've been making excuses to see you and I'm tired of pretending I'm just forgetful. Because I think maybe you feel this too. I did. God, I did. I'd been feeling it since the first time he came back. Maybe even since that initial handshake. I stepped back and let him in, and this time when the door closed behind him, everything felt different. We stood in my tiny entryway, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I'm not good at this, he said. At saying what I want, at being honest about this stuff. I reached out and took his hand, lacing our fingers together. His palm was warm and steady. Try, I said. He told me he'd noticed me that first day, the way I'd been so worried about the apartment, how I'd offered him water 3 times and apologized for the mess even though the place was spotless. He said he'd gone home that night and couldn't stop thinking about my smile, about how I'd made terrible electrical puns to cope with my anxiety. He said he'd genuinely forgotten the voltage tester, but then realized it gave him an excuse to see me again. After that, the forgetting became intentional. He'd been leaving things behind like breadcrumbs, hoping I'd want him to come back. I told him I'd been hoping he'd forget something else, that I'd started looking forward to the doorbell, to seeing him standing there with that embarrassed expression, that I'd noticed his hands that first day and hadn't stopped noticing them since, that when our fingers brushed over the wire strippers, I'd felt it everywhere, that I'd been thinking about him constantly, wondering if I was reading too much into things, afraid to hope. We talked for hours that night, sitting on my couch, then on the floor with our backs against the wall, sharing takeout Thai food I ordered around 9. He told me about growing up in Oregon, about learning the trade from his uncle, about moving here 3 years ago for a fresh start after a relationship ended badly. I told him about my family in Chicago, about choosing art school over law school and disappointing my parents, about my cat named Pixel, who was currently hiding under the bed because strangers made him anxious. Around midnight, we were sitting close enough that our shoulders touched, and Soren went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I kiss you?" Just like that, straightforward and honest. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice, and he leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to change my mind. When his lips met mine, it was soft and careful and absolutely perfect. He tasted like Thai basil and possibility. His hand came up to cup my jaw, thumb brushing my cheekbone, and I felt myself melting into him. We kissed for a long time, slow and exploratory, learning each other. His other hand found my waist, pulled me closer. I threaded my fingers through his hair, finally loosening that bun I'd been curious about. His hair fell past his shoulders, silky and beautiful, and he made this small sound when I ran my hands through it that made me want to hear it again. Eventually we broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "Wow," I whispered. "Yeah, he agreed. Wow. He stayed over that night, but we just slept, curled together in my bed with Pixel eventually creeping out to investigate and ending up purring between us. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my curtains and Soren's arm around my waist, his breath warm on the back of my neck. For a moment I thought maybe I'd dreamed it all, but then he stirred and pulled me closer and mumbled "Good morning" against my shoulder, and I knew it was real. We spent that whole weekend together. He had to leave Saturday afternoon for a job, but he came back that evening with his toolbox and a bag of groceries. "I'm going to cook for you," he announced, "and I'm officially leaving this toolbox here, so I have a legitimate reason to keep coming back." I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching him work, and the domesticity of it made my chest ache in the best way. He made this incredible pasta with vegetables and garlic, moving around my kitchen like he belonged there, and maybe he did. Sunday, we barely left the apartment. We watched movies, talked about everything and nothing, kissed on the couch until we were both dizzy with it. He told me about his dreams of maybe starting his own electrical contracting business someday. I showed him my design portfolio, nervous about his reaction, but he looked through every piece with genuine interest, asking questions about my process, making me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected. That evening, sitting on my balcony watching the sunset, he took my hand and said, "I want to do this right. I want to take you on actual dates, introduce you to my friends. Be the kind of guy who deserves you." I turned to look at him, this beautiful man who'd literally left pieces of himself in my apartment so he'd have excuses to return. "You already are," I told him. He kissed me as the sky turned orange and pink, and I thought about how random it all was, how a smoking outlet had led to this. We've been together for 8 months now. His toolbox still lives in my hallway closet, though now it's joined by his spare work boots and a growing collection of his clothes in my dresser. He has a key. Pixel loves him more than me, which I pretend to be annoyed about. We've fallen into this easy rhythm where some nights he comes straight here from jobs, smelling like wire and effort, and I've learned to love that too. The evidence of his work, the capable way he moves through the world. Last week we were lying in bed and I asked him if he really did forget that first voltage tester or if it was all part of some elaborate plan. He was quiet for a moment, fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. "Honestly," he said, "I genuinely forgot it. But when I realized where it was, I was so happy to have a reason to see you again. After that, yeah, totally intentional. Every single thing I left behind was on purpose. I started laughing and couldn't stop. So you're telling me you're not actually forgetful at all?" He grinned and kissed my forehead. "I'm extremely organized," he said, "except when it comes to you. Around you I forget everything, how to think, how to breathe, how to be anything except completely gone for you. I think about that first day a lot, how close I came to just living with a broken outlet, how different my life would be if I hadn't made that call. Sometimes the smallest decisions lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes love shows up in work boots and a navy shirt, carrying a toolbox full of excuses to return. Sometimes it's as simple as opening your door and letting someone in again and again, until one day you realize you never want them to leave. Soren still does electrical work, still carries that same toolbox, but now when he comes home, it's to our apartment, our life, our carefully constructed circuit of love and trust and ridiculous inside jokes about forgotten tools. And every single time he walks through that door, I fall for him all over again, grateful for faulty wiring and second chances and the electrician who left his heart behind and kept coming back to claim it.